This video is brought to you by Ground News. For the past 15 years, the SNP have dominated Scottish politics, winning election after election. However, since Nicola Sturgeon's resignation in February, their poll numbers have cratered, and they're now just a few points ahead of Labour. So in this video, we're going to have a look at why the SNP's poll ratings have collapsed, and what this means for Scottish independence. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So it's worth starting by noting quite how successful the SNP have been as an electoral force for the past 15 years or so. Under the leadership of Alex Salmond, in 2007 they became the largest party in Holyrood, Scotland's devolved assembly, winning 47 of the 129 seats available, with just over 30% of the popular vote. Things got even better at the next election in 2011, when they won an outright majority of 69 seats, with about 45% of the vote. Nicola Sturgeon succeeded Salmond as party leader a couple of years later, and while she never quite won an outright majority, she was immensely popular and kept the SNP as Holyrood's largest party, winning over 40% of the vote and over 60 seats in both 2016 and 2021. At national elections, it took a bit more time for the SNP to assert its dominance, but once it did, it was insurmountable. At the 2010 general election, Salmond's SNP were only the third biggest party in Scotland. They won 19.9% of the vote, but the UK's first-past-the-post system meant they only won 6 of Scotland's 59 seats, behind both Labour and the Lib Dems, who won 41 and 11 seats respectively. However, at Sturgeon's first general election in 2015, they won 50% of the vote, and an astonishing 56 of the 59 seats available. Things didn't go quite as well in 2017, but they remained the largest Scottish party in Westminster, and the SNP reasserted itself in 2019, winning 45% of the vote and 48 seats. Towards the end of Boris Johnson's tenure, with the Conservative Party in turmoil and the SNP's poll ratings surging, Sturgeon took the initiative and announced her intention to hold another Scottish referendum on October the 19th, 2023. At the time, this didn't look impossible. While there were legal obstacles, Sturgeon piled on the political pressure by promising to turn the next election into a de facto referendum. And when Liz Truss succeeded Boris Johnson, it looked like she might well win it. However, in the last few months or so, the SNP's fortunes have reversed. On February the 15th, Sturgeon announced her resignation, claiming she was tired and that the job of First Minister was taking its toll on her and her family. Since then, the SNP's poll numbers have cratered, going from about 50% to nearer 35%. While that might not sound that bad, given they're still the most popular party on the ballot, the trajectory doesn't look good. And because of first past the post, this decline will mean the SNP will lose a whole load of seats at the next general election. For context, when they were on 50% of the vote, they were on track to win something like 50 seats. With 35% of the vote, that falls to about 30. So what's going on? Well, as we see it, there are 4 reasons for decline. First, Sturgeon's replacement, Humza Yousaf. Yousaf pitched himself as the Sturgeon continuity candidate, but while they might share politics, Yousaf is nowhere near as popular as Sturgeon. Polling suggests he was less popular than his main opponent, Kate Forbes, and currently has an approval rating of -17, according to the latest polls from Retfield Wilson. Not only is this down 10 points compared to the beginning of April, but it's also way below Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar, who's on +3. The second reason is the SNP's ongoing scandals. We're not going to go into this too much in detail, both because it's a bit technical and because we don't want to get done for contempt of court. But basically, at the moment, the SNP is being investigated for mismanaging its party finances, which is why former chief executive and husband of Nicola Sturgeon, Peter Morell, was arrested earlier this year. The third reason is the stabilisation of English politics. One of the things that made Sturgeon and the SNP so popular was the flattering contrast between them and the Conservatives under Boris Johnson and then Liz Truss. Now that English politics is dominated by two relative moderates, Sunak and Starmer, the SNP no longer look like the only adults in the room. The fourth reason is the reduced salience of Brexit. The UK's relationship with the EU is no longer a priority for most voters, who are generally more worried about domestic issues like inflation, the NHS, and immigration. Brexit is now the top issue for just 1% of Brits, and only 7% consider it a priority. One of the reasons the SNP was so popular was that they were the only major party in the UK promising to rejoin the EU, albeit via Scottish independence, which made them the go-to party for Scottish Remainers who weren't totally opposed to independence. The issue's declining salience has softened this support and refocused voters' attention on the SNP's domestic record, which isn't great. Despite the fact that Scottish government funding per person is over 30% higher than equivalent English funding, Scotland has an NHS crisis, the most drug deaths in Europe, and some of the worst educational outcomes in the UK. So, on to the last part of this video. What does this mean for Scottish independence? Well, the SNP's decline makes Scottish independence less likely in two ways. First, and most obviously, it makes a referendum less likely. Sturgeon wanted to force Westminster to agree to an official referendum by turning the next election into a de facto referendum. But if the SNP are only polling on 35%, this isn't going to happen. Second, the SNP's decline also reduces support for independence. The pro-independence vote can be split into hard and soft pro-independence voters. Hard voters are in favour of independence in principle, whatever happens. These voters will always vote for independence at a referendum, and always vote for a pro-independence party like the SNP or ALBA at elections. Soft voters are essentially swing voters, who aren't as committed to the cause but were convinced over to the independence camp by a variety of factors, including a deep dislike of the Conservatives, the possibility of rejoining the EU, and, importantly, the appeal of Sturgeon's SNP. With a Conservative loss in 2024 looking inevitable, and Brexit in the rearview mirror, these soft pro-independence voters were already cooling on independence. But the collapse of the SNP has been the nail in the coffin, which is why No has opened up a steady lead in polling since Sturgeon stepped down. In retrospect, Sturgeon's popularity, Boris Johnson's unpopularity, and Brexit were a perfect confluence for Scottish independence. In this new political era, where Sturgeon has given way to Youssef, Johnson has been replaced by Sunak, and is soon to be replaced by Starmer, and Brexit is finally done, it looks like Scottish independence might be dead in the water. Ultimately, we'll have to wait and see what happens next in this story. But honestly, it seems like there's a breaking news story every hour. So how do I stay up to date? Well, I could just read one source, but then I run the risk of falling into an echo chamber and missing entire stories. Another answer is to download multiple news apps, but then you end up with 15 push notifications for the same story, and that's not something I'm down for. So instead, right on my phone's home screen, I have an app which collects all news sources in one place. Ground News is a website and app designed to help you break through media bias and fully understand the biggest news stories every day. Here's how it works. The first thing you'll see is the home feed. Here, you'll obviously find the biggest and most up-to-date news stories, but that's only the beginning. For example, here's a story about how investment in renewable energies must quadruple to meet the climate targets. Right away, you can see the reporting bias. This story has 62% left-leaning coverage and only 14% right-leaning coverage. You can also see how many total sources have reported on this story, as well as get a brief glance of headlines from across the political spectrum. And if you click on the story, you can dig even deeper. Ground News offers a comprehensive breakdown for every story. You can read every headline, view the political bias and factuality score for every source, and you can even read the articles themselves right from the app. There's even a blind spot feature, which actively highlights stories people on your side of the aisle might be missing. And with their Chrome extension and personalized bias data, you can see exactly what you're missing. It's like a constantly updating Spotify Wrapped for news. Hopefully you can see that I like this, and honestly, I recommend it in real life all the time. Because of this, we've decided to offer a special 30% discount for Ground News' Vantage subscription. You can only access this discount by clicking on the link below. So check it out and help support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.